and show the.
We're recording.
Okay, so this is on restorative justice. And so my first thing was to research the league position for this area of criminal justice. And it was pretty easy because we have no position in restorative justice. So that was easy.
Well, okay, I have to argue with that, but I'll bring it up later.
Okay, well, that's what the document said, no position. So I'm just going with what you sent me. So then I looked a little bit more at some more information on the history of restorative justice. And I find out that, of course, this method was connected to very old peacemaking sessions used by Native Americans, and also Aboriginal communities have also used that for their court system. So peacemaking sessions, restorative justice sessions go way, way back. And we'll talk about the Restorative Justice Community Court set up in 2017 in North Lawndale on the west side of Chicago. Interestingly, an inspiration for this problem-solving court was set up in Cook County as far back as 1899. It was the first of its kind in the US. So to have this come back to Chicago in 2017 is pretty neat because that's where it first got started in the US. So we're going to look at a chart that compares retributive justice with restorative justice, and we're going to focus on restorative justice. So I don't have to read it all to you. You're pretty good readers. But for retributive justice, crime is an act against the state, a violation of law, an abstract idea. Restorative justice, crime is an act against another person and the community. So of course it's about humanity in the restorative justice. It's more about law in the retributive justice.
Lona, you are not sharing your screen.
I'm not sharing the screen. Okay.
You went to it, but you didn't.
Okay. So
okay. Just a minute.
Okay, we'll do that.
Where are we? Where's my Zoom?
There it is. Okay.
Share screen.
Okay, share screen.
And which
and down
one is
share,
it?
share.
Yeah, which one?
It's the chart, so it must be that one.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. See, you didn't have to read anyway. I was going to do it for you. So retributive, the criminal justice system controls crime, and for restorative, crime control lies primarily in the community. It's up to the community. Offender accountability defined as taking punishment. Punishment's really big in our usual criminal justice system. Accountability is more important in restorative justice, assuming responsibility and taking action to repair the harm. Crime is an individual act with individual responsibility, as opposed to crime has both individual and social dimensions of responsibility. Again, back to punishment, it's effective. Threats of punishment deter crime, punishment changes behavior. And of course, for the humane side, punishment alone is not effective in changing behavior and is disruptive to community harmony and good relationships. Victims are peripheral to the process for our normal way of doing things in criminal justice, and victims are central to the process of resolving a crime for restorative. The offender is defined by deficits. We're looking for all the faults, all the bad things. The offender is defined by capacity to make reparation, to move forward, and to be a productive citizen in the future. The focus is on establishing blame or guilt on the past. And of course, there's a focus on problem solving, on liabilities, obligations, and on the future, as I said earlier. Emphasis on adversarial relationships. So notice these are the negatives. It's punishment, it's adversaries. It sounds like it's a competition, almost a football game where there's got to be a winner and a loser. For restorative, there's an emphasis on dialogue and negotiation. Imposition of pain to punish and deter or prevent. We are going to hurt the person who hurt somebody else. For restorative, restitution is a means of restoring both parties, the goal of reconciliation, restoration. So for criminal justice, as we normally define it, the community is on the sideline. It's represented by an abstract concept created by the state. Whereas for restorative, the community as facilitator in restorative process. The response is focused on the offender's past behavior. We said that a little bit earlier. The response is focused on harmful consequences of offenders' behavior with the emphasis on the future. We have a dependence upon proxy professionals for criminal justice, and we have direct involvement by participants for restorative. So we have a video, and Jean gets, before we do the video,
find it. 1 second here now.
Jean's going to try to find it. So in our traditional system, there are 3 questions, and I'll get to these questions again later, but just keep these in mind. Our traditional system, number 1, who did it? Number 2, what laws were broken? Number 3, what should be done to punish or treat the offender? As for the restorative justice, there are a lot more questions. Who's been harmed? What's the nature of the harm resulting from the crime? What needs to be done to make it right or repair the harm? Who's responsible for this repair? How can the responsible party return to a law-abiding life? So Jean is going to get us started on a short video, which gets to the core of understanding the concept of restorative justice and why it is superior to our current justice system. So take it away, Jean.
Jean is going to try to do that. One second here now.
Okay.
Okay.
We tried it from our end.
There we
There we go.
Okay. Down below that has closed captioning, so you can read it if you can't hear it very well.
More than half of victims of violent crime don't even call the police. They prefer nothing to everything we have to offer. The vast majority of crime survivors' pain goes unhealed. What the existence of restorative justice means is that we can no longer pretend we don't know what else to do. As a country, we're really good at punishment. It's passive. It doesn't require people to act. It certainly doesn't require them to change. When we lock people up, we excuse them from their responsibility to answer for what they've done. Restorative justice is a process to hold them accountable. It's a tool. People take turns answering questions like what happened, what needs arise, whose responsibility is it to do those things, and how is that person going to do it? It requires someone to take responsibility to repair things as much as possible and to never commit that harm again. This isn't about feeling sorry. It's about doing sorry. Things like go to school, get a job, pay restitution, apologize, do community service. Restorative justice practices have been used to address low-level infractions like vandalism up to addressing the impact of murder on the surviving family members. Restorative justice processes are first and foremost about meeting the needs of people who are hurt. Sometimes the person who can make the greatest contribution to a survivor's healing is the person who harmed them. To come through trauma, we need answers to our questions. To say, my life was never the same after you hurt me like that. Survivors want the most safety possibly available. So if incarceration actually produced safety, we would be the safest country in human history. That's not what we have. The core drivers of violence are shame, isolation, and inability, even economically, and exposure to violence. And we bake those into prison to client to keep people from committing further violence. Incarceration exposes people to exactly the things that increase the likelihood that they'll go on to harm others. People who are hurt deserve a process that will help them heal. People who are responsible for crime have an obligation to be accountable for that. All of us deserve responses to crime that actually make us safer. Our current criminal justice system doesn't deliver any of those, and restorative justice at its best delivers them all.
That's it.
Okay, I think we have a minute or two. If you have any questions or you want to discuss a little bit, the sound was really bad. When we played it, it was really good.
Wait a minute, sorry.
But we were, we were really glad that it was subtitled because we, that's what happens with YouTube and so on. So at any rate, if you have questions, you can unmute yourself. 5 minutes or so. If you have questions or comments, any personal experience with restorative justice that you want to share, that'd be great.
Well, it's been a big deal in Kane County, certainly, that we've worked real hard to try to get help for mentally ill people, and that helping them while they're in jail and then giving them further help afterwards. Now I don't know if, and I guess maybe I may be conflating alternative, approaches with restorative justice. We do have in our current position mention of alternatives to, the justice system. We don't have anything that specifically talks about restorative justice. So like drug courts and, help for the mentally ill, do those fall under restorative justice?
To some extent, there are lots of different models, and to some extent, but I think what they're looking for are, this is an offender who could probably go into the Department of Corrections, and this is a way to remove those people from that path and put them on another path that is probably going to be a lot more successful. And again, it's a crime has been committed, and but it's not generally a felony, a high level crime. So this is more to pull them out of the path into prison and to put them into a community setting where they're going to have some help to move away from whatever caused them to commit that crime. So I don't know if mental health or even drug is kind of on the periphery because somebody may have been harmed by that, but mostly it's the person himself or herself. So we'll just go through and see if we find any of these that seem to look more like alternative.
Mhm.
I'll share screen again. Okay, you're going to go to your pros and cons. Now, where's this?
Right there.
It's right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, so question 8A, should the criminal justice system be open to the use of restorative justice approaches and values? The pro is listed in the Illinois Constitution, Article 1, Section 11, which states all penalties shall be determined both according to the seriousness of the offense and with the objective of restoring the offender to useful citizenship. So our traditional system of justice is an adversary system in which opposing parties present evidence and challenge the strength of the opposing party's case. The system rests on the assumption that such an adversarial process will result in a just outcome. Seems kind of odd. The tradition, and here are the same 3 questions I mentioned earlier. The traditional system asks the 3 questions: who did it, what laws were broken, and what should be done to punish or treat the offender. Restorative justice programs emphasize other questions. Who's been harmed? What's the nature of the harm resulting from the crime? What needs to be done to make it right or repair the harm? Who's responsible for this repair, and how can the responsible party return to a law-abiding life? There have been reforms in recent years which have modified our traditional justice system. By moving away from strictly punitive sentences, these programs reveal a willingness to seek better outcomes for the offender. Problem-solving courts and Adult Redeploy Illinois are two such programs. So we'll talk about the problem-solving courts first. They're there to recognize that certain offenders require services to meet needs that must be addressed before a just sentence can be determined. And then for the Adult Redeploy Illinois, this program allows offenders to serve their sentences in their own community, avoiding a transfer to IDOC and imprisonment. In 2018, PA 100-0999 expanded eligibility for Adult Redeploy Illinois to include all probation eligible offenders, which includes certain violent offenders. The Adult Redeploy Illinois and problem-solving courts are models that break away from traditional justice system because sanctions are imposed in the community and offenders receive services that address the root causes of their offenses. Rehabilitation and a successful return to society are goals of these diversions. Upon successful completion of these programs, defendants may have the original sentence reduced or even expunged. The expungement of a felony conviction eliminates the many barriers which face people who are burdened with a felony conviction. The Illinois Supreme Court has adopted uniform standards for problem-solving courts. These are non-adversarial proceedings with the goal of rehabilitation and a reduction in recidivism. There is court accountability, intensive supervision, drug testing, counseling, and treatment for substance disorders, mental health conditions, drugs, domestic violence concerns, and education and employment. Employment deficiencies. There are also veterans courts. There are various models, among them more than 3,000 different problem-solving courts in the country. So obviously there's going to be a variety. Back to the Adult Redeploy Illinois. I forgot the middle word there. The ARI is how it's abbreviated. It's based on a successful Youth Redeploy Illinois program and has some funding from the National Best Practices of Performance Incentive. The adult version was established by the Illinois Crime Reduction Act of 2009 to provide financial incentives to local jurisdictions for diversion programs to move individuals from state prison into community-based services. Administration by the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, the CJIA, provides grants to counties, groups of counties, and judicial circuits to increase programming in these areas to reduce the numbers of individuals sent to the Illinois Department of Corrections. We'll talk about the CJIA a little more as we discuss question 8B. And then the point is that restorative justice views crime as more than breaking the law and gives victims the chance to meet or communicate with their offender to explain the real impact of the crime. Crime causes harm, and justice should focus on repairing that harm. By repairing the harm to relationships between offenders and victims and offenders and the community that resulted from the crime, restorative justice seeks to understand and address the circumstances which contributed to the crime. This empowers victims by giving them a voice. Restorative justice holds offenders accountable for what they have done helps them to take responsibility and make amends. So that was a lot of words for the pro, and there are some wonderful reasons for the pro. The con is pretty short and simple. The criminal justice system exists for the victims of crimes to receive restitution and retribution and to punish the offenders. Any questions, comments at this point?
Well, I have a question for Kathy. I know that in Kane County, the drug court is very active. Have you had any connection with that? Do you know how that works or how effective it is? I understand it's supposed to be pretty effective.
Well, I've only had contact with it in the context of when people fail, because I represented people on appeal. So my clients were never the ones who succeeded in drug court. They were the ones who had terrible stories to tell about it because they found it, inconvenient. So.
But the drug court is an example of what she's talking about, right? The problem-solving court.
Yes, it is. It's more one of the many ways that a person could be treated in a restorative justice system. But I think a lot of the restorative justice thing is actually, the drug crimes are actually kind of a crime against yourself for the most part.
Right.
Whereas the restorative justice system, I think where it's revolutionary is that it addresses, it puts the victim in the mix. I mean, I have seen cases in prosecutions where people, like quite often in domestic battery will come out, domestic violence, where the victim will not cooperate with the prosecution. And if they happen to have other witnesses, they go forward with it anyway. And so, we don't really need the victim. And of course, in a murder, we never have the victim. But, restorative justice actually, when gets the victim back into the picture. And the victim's connections and stuff, for better or worse.
I have a question.
Right. Yeah.
I have two. Is the victim obliged to be part of this? And also, if you are going through this restorative program, are you housed? Do you have to get a job and housing and go through this? How does all that work? And that's one thing. What if I just want to wash my hands? I'm the victim and fine, go away. Am I obliged?
Well, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about who else is involved in this. It's not just the two people, just the offender and the victim.
Yeah.
That there's a whole group involved.
Yeah, this goes to the question.
But the other thing I think is that, like they said, there are 3,000 different types of restorative justice. So I imagine that, some are more, I believe in the drug court, you live at home in the community.
Yeah.
Well, most of these are in the community. The community is the really big part of this. So we'll go to 8B then. To be successful, most restorative justice courts involve members of the community. And that's a question, and I think it should not be a question. Yeah, that's weird. So the pro is that creating a restorative justice process that operates with fidelity inside the traditional criminal courts is a challenging task. In 2017, Chief Judge Timothy C. Evans was charged with establishing a pilot project of a restorative justice community court on RJCC, serving the North Lawndale neighborhood of Chicago. That's on the west side of Chicago. As he did so, he stated, "As a court system, we must work to end the cycle of recidivism. Our new community court empowers victims and residents to work as our partners to help restore nonviolent individuals back to society, provide restitution to victims, and improve our quality of life." There was a lengthy article in the Atlantic magazine dated May 2nd, 2017. Again, this is the same year that this started, which gave many more details on this problem-solving court. Backed by a grant from the Department of Justice, it was one of 10 jurisdictions around the country chosen as a pilot project. It was expected to serve about 100 offenders in the first year. With Circuit Judge Colleen Sheehan presiding, the RJCC empowers victims and residents to help restore nonviolent individuals back to society and to provide restitution to victims. The court is restricted to 18 to 26-year-olds, a population also known as emerging adults. Because this age group is not fully mature and not fully culpable for their actions, they need a response to their offenses, which is tailored for them. Judge Sheehan, who serves primarily as a judge in Cook County's juvenile courts, commented, "Many of the people I work with are so young and there is so much possibility for their lives." For a case to be eligible for the court, both the person charged and the victim of the crime must agree to participate in the process. In addition, the person charged must have been charged with a nonviolent felony or misdemeanor, live in North Lawndale or Garfield Park, have a nonviolent criminal history, and accept responsibility for the harm caused. And the intention of this is welcoming. It's not punishment, but it's a welcoming that we want to keep you as part of our community. We want you to be involved in the community and to have a future. Unlike a traditional court setting, participants sit at a table on the same level as the judge. Restorative conferences and peace circles involve defendants, victims, family members, friends, others affected by the crime, and the community. The people most impacted by the crime are brought together to address and repair the harm. Restorative conferences and peace circles involve the people that we talked about. Victims have the opportunity to directly address the defendant to express how they were hurt and what they need to heal from the crime. Again, back to the Atlantic article, it explains that since 2015, the Community Restorative Justice Hub, composed of community groups, police, and local officials, have been working to mitigate distrust of residents toward the traditional criminal justice system. The article also details on how to operate between opposing philosophies of restorative justice and mainstream criminal justice system. There's a worry that the latter, the criminal justice system, could influence the restorative justice community court to be more punitive than originally intended. Another point, defendants take accountability for their actions, and then they work out an agreement with the person harmed and with the community. Agreements can focus on restitution, community service, and letters of apology. Needs of the offenders are also addressed. They're connected with services including mental health counseling, substance abuse treatment, education, job training, and parenting classes. The goal is the restoration of relationships and the repair of harm done to all three, the community, the victim, and the offender. Defendants who successfully complete the program may have their charges dropped and arrests expunged. The court will hold offenders accountable for their actions, but not burden them with a felony conviction that restricts their access to decent employment or housing. RJCC expects to be dealing with crimes such as burglary, property damage, and theft. Another point, the court works even if there isn't a victim. Drug cases are common, and at times there's no specific victim. And that's what Kathy was saying earlier, that in a drug case, you know, the victim is the person doing the drugs. So sometimes volunteers serve as surrogate victims. Court personnel and supporters recruit community members as surrogate victims. These volunteers often fall into two categories: former victims of crimes or people with criminal backgrounds who now want to act as mentors. WBEZ carried a great article called "This Chicago Court Uses Peace Circles to Dole Out Justice," and that was June 19th, 2018. So that's a year after this court got started. It's a lengthy article which includes some good photos along with details. In it, Chief Judge Evans wants the court to expand, taking on more cases and more neighborhoods, with Roseland and Englewood being mentioned among the 76 possibilities in Chicagoland. Why is there hope for better results using a restorative justice model? In the traditional system, young people are too often handed exorbitant punishment for their crimes, and victims get short shrift. Regarding victims, Judge Sheehan observed, "The victims I have known are very generous, and they really just want something good to come out of a negative thing. And for the offender, the restorative justice process can keep a person accountable and allow them to pay their debt, so to speak, so they do not have to pay it over and over again by being saddled with a felony conviction for the rest of their life." Finally, there are challenges to the effective employment of restorative justice, including need for ongoing outreach to the community, the question if restorative justice is a free choice, and adequate funding. So for ongoing outreach, it's essential in building trust that restorative justice will be less punitive and more productive as a way of addressing crime. Time is required to build a relationship with neighborhood groups and residents that will be effective. The Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority has prepared a Bridges to Justice toolkit to guide the integration of community involvement in adult diversion programs. The role of the community in the restorative justice model cannot be overstated. I scanned the table of contents of the toolkit and found that there are restorative justice initiatives in about 12 counties, the closest being LaSalle, Winnebago, Grundy, Will, Cook, and Lake. I didn't find any mention of Kane, DeKalb, McHenry, Kendall, and DuPage. So, they mentioned 12 counties, and, the closest ones weren't figured in those. Can restorative justice operate freely within the criminal justice system? Is restorative justice a free choice? Will defendants choose it to avoid incarceration? Will they be truly committed to the process of repairing the harm? Sincere intent on the part of the victim and the offender and the participation of the community can address this challenge. As for funding and grants, receiving a grant from the Robert McCormick Foundation, researchers at Adler University are measuring the court's success over a 3-year period. The evaluation will include both quantitative and qualitative assessments of participating adults and a control group comprised of those who have been involved in the traditional criminal justice system. Among measured outcomes will be the psychosocial changes that result from restorative justice programming, such as changes in empathy, social support, and relationships. And then the con. It can be exhausting work to keep community members involved in restorative justice. In the adversarial system, members of the community do not need to be involved in the process. It is between the offender, the victim, and the court. Restorative justice courts should only focus on the victim being made whole subsequent to a crime. Any comments, concerns, questions?
What I'm wondering is.
If you have time, go back to the
I'm wondering if you have someone who's been the victim of a horrific rape and is totally traumatized and just is too scared to face the perpetrator in court. Did they talk anything about that? type
No,
of,
but if you remember, it's not just the victim and the offender. They include friends. So the victim can have friends, the offender can have friends. They include community members. So both of them can involve the community. So it's a community dialogue. It's not just, you know, the victim, offender, and the judge. But it
I
does,
think
as they
was
said, I
looking-
mean, it's exhausting. We know that we, you know, in previous sessions, we've talked about how, you know, they get like 1 minute. The judge gets 1 minute to decide what's going to happen with this person in bond court and on all of that. Well, this is, I mean, this can take hours and days. I don't know, Kathy, in drug court, what's the average amount of time?
Well, you mean in the version of the drug court? I think that the program is like a couple of years for the participation. I think it depends on the individual too. But, you know, there is a lot, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of people involved and a lot of time is taken, and it's tailored to more to the individual than ordinary sentencing. You know, ordinary sentencing is supposed to be in reality it isn't.
Which all the problem-solving courts are basically tailored to the individual. But in answer to your question, Jean, typically someone that is a rape, being charged with rape and prosecuted for rape would not qualify for this.
oh,
Because it says that it needs to be something that's more of a minor type crime.
Mm.
And so while they do have situations where the victim and the assailant are involved in some sort of group situation, a rape wouldn't qualify for this, would it, Kathy?
You know, see, that was my big question. It sounds like up to this point, nobody's tried it with major crimes. It seems to be, particularly with younger offenders, oddly, you know, things like rape and murder and stuff are not, you know, I mean, sometimes they're just, you know, almost like a video game to them when they do it.
Yeah.
And it does seem like, I mean, even though they qualify to be treated as an adult, to prosecuted as an adult, it's to me, it's inhumane to hold them responsible the same way as if, you know, I just got fed up and got somebody and killed my neighbor that annoys me. You know, it's just not the same thing.
And the video, you know, mentioned up to it and possibly including murder.
That's
But,
right.
you know, what I read, what I just read to you a little bit ago says that it expects to be dealing with crimes such as burglary, property damage, and theft.
Right.
So, you know, so that's a whole lot less problematic than
Less violent.
than the others. And there's not so much violence included in that, so.
But a lot of the peace circle stuff is adapted from what they do when they work with kids.
Yeah.
And then we also will talk, Kathy, I believe you're going to be, are you doing emergent? You're not.
I'm doing it next week.
Okay, emerging adults is going to be something that talks about similar programs working with people and young people in that age group. And the other thing that Kathy's going to talk about is the whole idea of felony murder convictions.
Among other things, yeah.
That all kind of goes into the same idea of restorative justice, because we're putting people in a box and not letting them out for a hell of a long time, period. And so
Margie, you have a question, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering
Margie.
if,
Okay.
if in these programs, you know, what if you get in the middle of it, and I've had enough? How are you held accountable to show up? You know, if you're living at home and you're in a.
Well, if, you know, there's a path. If you get off the path that we've set out to help you, then you go back onto the other path, which is straight into
Yeah.
Lockup.
Okay, so if you miss so many times coming or something like that, then it looks like you're gonna go. Are there any measurable outcomes yet on any of
No,
these?
that's what I said. That's what I mentioned, that Adler was doing the 3-year study. So, there probably are some, they were not included in any of the material that we were given. And I didn't know how to look for that. So we'll go on to 8C.
I've heard really good reports from our drug court that, and maybe it's just anecdotal, but there seems to be strong support for it
Yes.
in Kane County.
Yes.
Good. Okay, 8C is very easy. Must restorative justice courts be adequately funded?
If you want to do it, yeah.
So, as noted above, funding can be a challenge, but this model has such promise of actually restoring young people to their communities, at the same time addressing the needs and concerns of victims in a manner far superior to our traditional system. How do you measure cost when results can be so promising? The con, it seems unlikely that the two systems can be adequately funded at the same time. This is a new experiment in Illinois. It is too early to see whether the outcomes measure up to the hopes for restorative justice. Restorative justice courts should only focus on the victim being made whole subsequent to a crime. That seems like it would just perpetuate the crimes, but if you're not focused on the reason for the commission of the crime. And of course, we're now in a funding period with so much lost revenue that this question, which might have looked really amazing this time last year, now with our funding deficit, might look a little different. So.
We have a number of people joining us from other leagues, and I'm wondering whether you are familiar with any of these problem-solving courts in your regions.
I'm going
I've
to.
been studying the question
share
from Naperville, but I have no personal experience. But I did find, you were asking earlier about whether or not a victim might want to be part of the process. And I did find in my research that it was something that was voluntary. So it had to be agreed upon by both the victim as well as the perpetrator of the crime. Both parties had to be willing to take the alternative path of restorative justice. And I think the other thing I was going to ask, actually, is it Lynn?
I'm Lona.
Presenting, yeah. I was going to ask you what you thought about that last con, because to me it didn't seem, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, I guess, because the whole point
It didn't to me either. I thought it was kind of, trying to kick things around. It should only focus on the victim. See, that's the thing that, we're talking about the offender, and then we get to this con and we say, oh, kick the offender aside. It's all about the victim, which really kind of goes back to the criminal justice as we know it. We want the offender to pay for the crime so that the victim will be satisfied. It's a
right. So when we present these questions, I'm kind of new to the league and to to this whole process. Are those pros and cons that we are kind of stuck with?
Yeah.
Those are the ones that came with the study, but if you come up with additional cons, that certainly would be legitimate. When you have the actual meetings, the consensus meetings in January, the pros and cons will be presented for each of the questions. It certainly would be legitimate to add more to either side.
Yes, when you're having your meetings like this, please document I mean, as the discussion, in fact, we had one a couple weeks ago that was so good that we literally are going to have to use it for our consensus meetings, I believe.
Well, and what you
discussion,
can do with consensus, Brenda, is that you can, if people have strong disclaimers or strong pushback, you need to document that. That's what consensus is all about, because you need to document how much affirmative you got from the statement, but you also need to document if there were people who pushed back or disliked it or wanted to discredit it completely. You know, we can't do that. This is what we have. The criminal justice group had worked for, was it 3 years, Patty?
yes.
3 years on putting this together. So
Yeah.
we don't want to throw out the pros and the cons, but
But add to them.
And
we can add to them, we can modify them by comments. But those are what we have.
Okay, so if I were to be able to find some statistics that I thought might be supportive, I could include those. in the report.
absolutely, absolutely.
I have a question. Are the community members in these peace groups and everything, are they paid? Or volunteers?
It says volunteer. What I read is volunteer, volunteer for the surrogate victim, or volunteer for this or volunteer for that. And notice that they mentioned that it can involve the police, representatives from the police department, representatives from local officials, and that could be the mayor's office, or, people who are legitimately interested in criminal justice and how it looks in the community. But it can include religious leaders. It's a wide variety, social workers, teachers. But as far as I know, they're not paid. The judge is paid.
In Lawndale, they're not paid.
Yeah. I would guess.
Commitment to the community.
There have been wonderful articles, the Chicago Defender, which is what I understand is a Black publication, did a wonderful article on North Lawndale. And this WBEZ is a great article, and the Atlantic article. So, I mean, it's picking up, when you get into the Atlantic, it's not just a little local, article to fill in some space. So, Chicago has a reputation, some good, some bad, but as you see from 1899, we were the first to be working with this problem-solving method, and it started in Chicago.
Lynn, were you able to link to that Adler study? In the document, there was a link, and I tried to follow it, and I never got anywhere. It took me to the Adler. I don't know if it's the Adler Institute.
I think I didn't even try to link because I thought I had enough information.
Okay.
I didn't link to that. So, Jean, you might see if you can link to that at some point.
I was just looking. Brenda, put your email in the chat and I'll see if I can get back to you about that.
It's right above number 9, Jean. It's
Yeah, I know. I see it here.
Yeah, and there are two articles, Brenda. There's the researchers at Adler University are measuring the court success. That was one. And then another was Adler EDU page, McCormick Foundation funds, university evaluates evaluation of new restorative justice court. So there were two that you might, and they're probably both going to give you some of the same information.
Okay, yeah, I had clicked on those links, and I got to the Adler website, but I couldn't find the study.
Okay, well, we can ask the people who came up with the materials to
Because I think that would be really good information
track
to
those
have,
down.
right?
Sure.
In terms of helping to make the argument. I think the more numbers you have about success, because that's what everybody asks, right? Is it successful? Is it measured as being effective and successful?
And the
Reducing
3 year,
recidivism
and they were doing a 3-year study, and that should have been done, from what I gather,
right.
in the
I think it was,
spring, in
yeah, okay.
the spring of 2020. Now,
Right.
all things happening with COVID-19, but I would think that they would have had some pretty good results ready to collate.
I think the usual measure is recidivism. And, from what I've heard is that there definitely is an impact on less recidivism with programs like these.
Mhm.
Yeah, I had found something about a court in Brooklyn, I think, in one of those links, maybe, or maybe it was something I did on my own, where they had, but it was kind of modest improvements over the traditional criminal justice system in terms of recidivism. So it wasn't that exciting. I was hoping for something a little bit more positive,
So Kathy, you've really seen the dark side of it. I think that you've seen the people who didn't make it through. Do you have any idea, the percentages of the people that you see as opposed to who went through the program?
Well, a lot of the people that end up in the criminal justice system so often have so severe mental, emotional control, behavior control problems. I mean, what kind of strikes you is just kind of a level of immaturity a lot of people have that is so inhibiting, and it makes it very, very difficult for them to commit to something and carry through. That's why, I think that if restorative justice is used in conjunction with all the other things you've talked about that are preventative, to try to keep crime from happening in the first place. And then when it does, to use restorative justice, I think we'd have a very tight system that would actually work. Because part of the problem is that by the time somebody gets to be even 14, 15 years old, let alone 18, 19, and they start, getting caught doing things, they're so damaged. It's very difficult for them to cooperate with something like this. But that's why I saw the people who just couldn't cooperate. They didn't cooperate with me either, so.
Well, I think there's something positive going on. I tutored for half a dozen years out at the Illinois Youth Center in St. Charles. And we just used to have a flood of young people we couldn't keep up with. We didn't have enough tutors. And I'm not tutoring there anymore because the numbers are down so significantly that there's just not the need for all the tutors there. I think I heard recently the numbers were down like 50, 60.
It's
something.
under 100.
Yeah,
It's well
I
under
think they
100.
were at like 300 and now they're down to 60.
Right.
Yeah.
So
When I worked there, we had 600.
Yeah. Wow.
my reading of the situation is there's something good happening someplace. Because the numbers aren't there for the youth center.
My question is, where are they?
Well,
Yeah,
but
They're somewhere.
this is getting into next week in part, but but they changed the. I'll give you a bit of a preview.
Okay, well, I got you started.
Yeah, they changed the age for juvenile justice from 17 to 18. And they thought, oh my gosh, we're going to be overwhelmed with lots more people. And in fact, what they wound up seeing was this dramatic drop. And so it's coming along with this just a different attitude towards how do you deal with people as a whole person is part of it. But that the dramatic drop directly related to they thought, as I said, they thought they would have tons more when they increased the age, but that didn't happen. So how about people from other leagues? Once again, do you have other experiences with problem-solving courts, or have you encountered any of this, what we're talking about?
Well, I hope this gave you lots of information. I tried to read through as many articles as I could, and they were fascinating. I found it quite interesting. So, and you know, the fact that we make national news is pretty cool too. So that's
In a positive way.
in a positive,
yeah.
yeah, right, in a positive way. So, right.
I actually have kind of a personal experience,
Ah.
Jean, with restorative justice type situation that at the time I didn't know what it was really. My neighbor's daughter was arrested for shoplifting, and she ended up, she went to jail, and they went and picked her up. And this is suburbia, and this is she was maybe 15 or 16 at the time. And it was a kid who just, you know, she was a good kid. It wasn't like she was chronically in trouble. And so she was a good candidate for this program that diverted her out of the, you know, typical criminal justice system. And she had, I can't remember all the things that she had to do, but I know she needed to go into some counseling. I know she had to tell her whole story in front of a group of peers in an auditorium.
Wow.
I think it was in Aurora, at the Aurora police station, and explain to them, you know, what she did, why she did it, and how she felt about it. And I remember my neighbor saying it was a really powerful experience. And now, so I guess you could call her a success, because this was like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and you know, she's not in the system. And so I think that to me sounds like exactly how a restorative justice court should operate, right? Get the person who did the crime to talk about their crime, own up to it, take responsibility for it. I think she had to do something to, because it was shoplifting, she had to do something to make the, you know, the store whole. I think she had to pay a fine or something, and then just answer to her peers, you know, and get the counseling that she needed for, you know, to address why she was shoplifting in the first place. So.
That's good.
Yeah.
Positive.
Yeah.
So Jean, I got you set up for next week.
You did. So next week we're talking about, I'm going to call it more like a prolonged adolescence or young adults, that I'll explain next week why, as a developmental psychologist, I have problems with calling them emerging adults. But it's definitely they're on the right track. It's just the wrong verbiage. And we'll also talk about access to courts.
Oh,
Okay. Okay, that's great. And thank
Thanks a lot.
Anybody have any final words of wisdom for the group?
I'm going to thank Patty for all the work she did for 3 years in getting this up and running, because I think it's really good documentation. I mean, I didn't feel like I was floundering. There was almost too much.
well, sure.
But there were some really good kind of common interest stories, as well as some kind of jargony, wonky stuff. So, you know, you can go either direction, to the heartwarming stories or to the wonkiness, and
Right.
come out with something.
There are a lot of resources, and Brenda, I don't know if you got the 51 pages with all of the questions and all of the resources highlighted, but just because the Adler thing is in there a couple of times.
Oh, okay. So maybe my link just wasn't the right link.
I'll
I'm
help
looking.
you with that, Brenda.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
There's
Thanks a
lot
lot.
of stuff.
Okay.
We're looking forward to next week, Jean.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you, Lynn and
It'll be
Lona,
all right.
for
yes,
Lynn
thank you,
for
Lona.
being the tech man, and Lona for being the teacher.
Board meeting.
And stay safe, everyone, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
See y'all next week. Thanks for
Okay,
visiting.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jean, for
Lana.
doing this.